Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, everyone. So good to see you again for this third webinar as part of the intimacy series, the Schema therapy webinars, where we're diving deep into different modes that interfere with intimacy and connection. Really important to be able to identify these coping modes and bypass them. To help our clients to develop better intimate connections with their partners, either currently or in the future. All right, so as per usual, for those that have joined me on the other webinars, I'll go solid for probably 45 minutes and then I'll pause and see, what questions people might have, and answer some of those. And at that time, you're free to come off, and you can unmute yourself and you can chat about your question, or you can type it in the chat box. You can either type it to everyone or you can type it privately to me, depending on if you wanted other people to read it. But if you don't want your name identified, you can type it privately, and that way I can just read out the question without your name. All right, lovely. So let me just share today's PowerPoint slide. Here it is. Okay, so today is all about bypassing the detached protector, addressing the impact of avoidance and escape behaviours on people's intimate relationships. So this is such an important topic because too much detachment or too much disconnection is going to really take the steam or the energy out of the relationship over time, and can, just build up over years or decades, and eventually, a couple find themselves in a situation where there's just been too much disconnection for too long. So we want to be able to help people that are in this situation. Okay, so let's start with Jeff Young's definition of the detached protector mode, straight from his website. He says that this mode cuts off needs and feelings, detaches emotionally from people and rejects their help, feels withdrawn, spacey, distracted, disconnected, depersonalized, empty or bored, pursues distracting, self-soothing or self-stimulating activities in a compulsive way or to excess, may adopt a cynical, aloof or pessimistic stance to avoid investing in people or activities. Now that definition there is quite a strong one, I'd say. That could really tap into some of the more, the more serious presentations that is quite common in schema therapy. But, in the more general population, I think this is far more common. If we just took one of those little words, like if we just took that sort of people who might adopt a cynical, aloof or pessimistic stance, that's very common even in people in functioning relationships. Just this real mild dismissal is also common. It doesn't have to be full-blown disconnection and dissociation to warrant it being identified as a detached protector mode. All right. So that's what we're going to be exploring, the less severe sort of end of the spectrum today. So people that are in long-term committed relationships, but there's a side of them that is creating a wall or distance in the relationship, which is starting to cause problems. Okay. To help with your formulation, I developed this model because sometimes in clinical psychology, we get a little bit caught up in negative patterns and symptom relief and diagnosing and things like that. And sometimes I think we can lose sight of what we're working towards, which is not just symptom relief, but, I think everyone deep down wants to experience thriving. So, it had me sort of think about, what are the steps to take towards creating a thriving intimate relationship? And so this is not just something, you know, that I've done through learning, but, you know, in my own life, you know, really trying to look at, you know, what are the steps that I would need to take to sort of work towards a thriving intimate relationship. So I've sort of got it in layers, like a computer game. Okay, level one is commitment. You know, that's like the foundation. That's like two people who, once they've met each other and gotten to know each other, there is an investment on from both parties into, we're going to commit, you know, our energy and resources and attention to this relationship, and give it a lot of thought, and that's going to, you know, there's going to be the focus of our lives. So there's that commitment, there's this agreement that we're going to commit to one another. You know, and that's, you know, don't even think that that's like just a given in all long-term couples. Like, there are some people that get to like 10 years into a relationship and there hasn't been that solid commitment. There hasn't been that sort of overt, you know, I'm invested in this relationship. There's this sort of one foot out the door kind of feeling. Does that make sense? You know, there's this sort of, every now and then there's this talk of, you know, I'm not quite sure if this is the right relationship for me, but they've been there for 5 years or something like that. So commitment, you know, a solid commitment that feels solid to both parties, I feel is like level one, or towards creating a thriving intimate relationship. And some people maybe don't even sort of master that level. Yeah. So then once there's commitment, then I feel like the next level up or layer up from that is harmony, is creating harmony. And I think that a lot of couples therapy occurs at this layer, that these two people in the relationship are having trouble existing harmoniously. And that could be due to unhealed schemas. You know, one person's got an abandonment schema, the other person's got an emotional inhibition schema, and therefore their schemas are activating one another. Or one person's got entitlement, the other person's got self-sacrifice, and that's disrupting the harmony in the relationship. But another thing that also disrupts harmony, which I think is just far more pervasive, it is the battle between masculine energy and feminine energy. So it's just another kind of topic. I might actually go a little bit more in depth into that in the next webinar about joy. But feminine energy and masculine energy are two opposite energies. One's more focused on union and sharing and connection and togetherness, right? And this sort of closeness and being sort of close to one another. And masculine energy is more focused on autonomy and self-directedness and freedom to pursue a goal and things like that. So when you bring these two opposite energies into a relationship, and if there's not an appreciation for the two energies, then that's going to create a lot of disharmony, because, you know, the feminine partner is never going to feel like the needs for connection are met. The masculine partner might feel like the needs for autonomy are never met, and there might be a battle between the two, as opposed to an integration and an appreciation for both of those. When you have that harmony, so you're not in battle with one another all the time, then I feel like it is possible to sort of take things, say, to the next step, which is polarity, which might be really exaggerating the differences between the masculine and the feminine, and playing around with those different energies, you know, for the benefit of the sexual connection between the couple. But can you see how that's going to be very difficult to hang out at that level if there's no harmony underneath to support it? Like if the two people are arguing with one another all the time, or fighting with one another all the time, then there's going to be very low desire to enter that space of playfulness. So I feel like polarity or that sort of enhancing the sexual connection is, I don't think it's possible if you don't have harmony. I'm not sure. It probably exists, but it makes it very hard because the brain, you know, the amygdala is always activated, always feeling like you're on the battlefield, and that doesn't really support, you know, sexual intimacy between two people. So say if you've got, you know, some work that's been done at all these layers, then what I believe happens is that people in the relationship start to experience these glimpses of a relationship of infinite possibilities, which is just, to me is just like these moments of, wow, you know, this is what I wanted from a relationship. You know, this like full-blown appreciation for the relationship, or this sort of feeling of expansiveness, or this feeling of, wow, I can really be totally self-expressed and be myself, whether that is, you know, more masculine energy, feminine energy, or a bit of both, or whatever. But the point is that both people in the relationship are starting to feel like they can be their total unique selves, and they don't have to abandon themselves and become like, you know, something else in order to keep the relationship alive. So I thought just put that out there for you. That's something that I shared on a recent ISST webinar, just to help you to identify where does the work need to happen. And it's usually at the layer of harmony. Usually. Sometimes they haven't made a solid commitment to each other, so then you have to revisit, you know, the commitment of these people. You know, sometimes they're uncommitted, they're not invested in the partner that they're with, but they're scared to leave. You know, that they're so incompatible, but they're scared to end the relationship, which is a commitment issue. All right, so today's topic obviously is addressing the impact of the detached protector on interfering in creating harmony and a healthy, intimate connection. Right, so let's just start with this lovely figure here of healthy intimacy. See, we have two separate people, two individuals, and then they, you know, they come close together with one another, and there's this overlap where they create this sort of intimate bond. You know, and love is kind of like this sort of energy that gets generated between these two people when they have a commitment to one another. But it's really important that, you know, you can kind of see it in this way, that they've still got their separate lives going on, their own sort of unique sense of self. Right, so both partners in this diagram would use some kind of secure relating. I'm not saying that they both have secure attachment styles, because that's just more of a, you know, that's that can't be, you know, changed if they were born with an anxious attachment style. But they're using secure relating, or they have a healthy adult intent. Their intention is to create harmony, to create a healthy relationship where two persons' needs are met with one another, or they're working towards that. So there's enough separateness to create desire between the couple, which is from this sort of separateness. You know, see how they're not like on top of each other in this picture. So there's enough going on in their separate individual lives that has them want to kind of come back together and be drawn back to one another, to sort of, because there's something new to learn from this person. But there's also enough closeness to create an intimate bond or love, which is the overlap in the middle. Okay. So we call that interdependence. You know, they can lean on one another, but they're not dependent on one another for survival. It's a conscious choice. You know, we're going to create a relationship together, and both of our lives are going to be improved as a result of it. But you know, I'm not going to feel responsible for, you know, your livelihood. Yeah. So love is created through thousands of exchanges between the couple when they turn towards each other, make bids for connection, feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. And that creates this love bond. Yes, isn't that lovely? And then the desire is created through the separateness, through autonomy, through their separate selves, and the novelty that gets brought back into the relationship from each person's individual lives. So, you know, this person goes off and has their own set of friends or their own job, and this person goes off and likes rock climbing and playing poker or whatever, it doesn't matter. But the fact is that they have interests outside of one another, which brings sort of new energy back into the relationship. It's something to talk about, you know, there's interest then, because it's like sort of fascinating. It's like, well, you know, I'm just used to doing this all day, but then I get to hear your story about what you've been up to. Okay. Right, so now let's look at what happens when there's too much closeness. So there becomes enmeshment. So in this situation, it doesn't allow for the desire that is created from equal adult relationships. So in this scenario, there might be too much obligation, too much loyalty, you know, this idea that, you know, you're being disloyal if you know, have your own friendship group, for example. Then you're somehow betraying your partner, for example. Guilt might be used as a tool for connection, you know, making someone feel guilty for, you know, living a separate life and going off and having their own interests. So one person might use guilt to bring them back closer to home, resulting in one person feeling very smothered or chained in. Okay, and the picture kind of gets worse here. Now we've got a parent and a child dynamic. And in this scenario, it feels the relationship feels more like the family of origin dynamics. It doesn't feel like an adult intimate connection. So there's some kind of codependency going on here, where one person is the one who's more in charge, bossy, domineering, and the other person complies, submits, and is passive, but is also sort of fearful of the other person, afraid to speak up, afraid that if I speak about my needs or set a limit or a boundary, that's just going to piss the other person off. That's going to make them angry. Oh, I can't make them angry. So it becomes more like a parent and a child dynamic, you know. So there's this real difference of authority. That's no good for intimacy. It's just no good. But you can kind of see how that happens. You can see how people are drawn into relationships with people because they're playing out some old unhealed patterns from their childhood. And that's a lot of what imago therapy explores, but also really schema therapy as well, because the more we strengthen our healthy adult mode and meet the needs of our own vulnerable child, then the more we're able to show up in healthy adult mode in our adult intimate relationships and not show up in a parent mode or in a child mode with a partner. So that's the impact of too much closeness. But now let's turn to our topic of today, where there's not enough intimacy, there's too much distance. And that is usually occurring because there's one person in the relationship who has a prominent detached protector mode. So when that happens, the person kind of pulls away from the relationship. And there's a lot of activity going on outside of the relationship or in their heads or in some other realm of their life, but not enough activity going on that's shared between the couple. right? So you can kind of see what's going on here. It's very hard to create that intimate bond, that love connection, with so much distance. Yep. Then the other person, ends up feeling lonely, anxious, or sad. So that could be when you start to see people show up for therapy, and in couples therapy, for example, very common. All right. So let's have a look at what's the impact of an untreated detached protector mode. We want to know what happens if we don't address this. Firstly, the couple will not create an intimate bond. So it won't feel like there's some kind of warm, cozy thing that they have got, that they share, that sort of creates this internal sense of connection, this felt sense of connection, even when they're not physically with one another. That carries on, throughout the day. That the bond, you carry with you everywhere. So the couple will not get to create that sort of internal felt sense of connection. Often one partner will feel chronically lonely or anxious and not feel emotionally safe with the other, which eventually will result in decreased desire. So often the person with the detached protector mode may not be as aware of their feelings, full stop. So they may not be consciously aware of any suffering. If they're so caught up in their own inner world, say if they, are on smartphones all day long, or so caught up in their work that their work occupies 100% of their attention, they may not feel the loneliness or the distance or the disconnection that the other person is feeling. So the other person is kind of in the role of being the feeling one in that relationship. They're the ones that are more connected to their emotions, more connected to their heart, and they're feeling more in pain than perhaps the person with the detached protector mode is. I'm not saying the person with the detached protector mode isn't in as much pain, but they're less aware of it. They're less consciously, presently aware of the pain that they're in. And then, of course, this is going to lead to decreased desire in the relationship because there's not enough emotional safety being created in this relationship. Okay, the other consequence is that the partner with the detached protector mode will not get to heal the schema that is underlying the detached protector mode. So they cannot fully participate in love as an exchange. So if you think about love as an exchange being a very conscious, very healthy adult practice that goes on, where there's an acceptance of vulnerability, there's also an acceptance of our own worthiness, an acceptance of the other person's worthiness, and there's just this generous, giving and receiving of love. If you've got schemas that are unhealed, then a lot of your energy and attention is actually going into protecting yourself from activating that schema again. It's very hard to participate in love, in this giving and receiving of love, when your amygdala is activated and you're feeling like you're in fight or flight mode a lot of the time, and a lot of your energy is going into protecting yourself from painful emotions. Yeah, so that's a devastating, tragic consequence of not addressing the detached protector mode. So they don't get to fully heal. Like, if we're going to look at what schemas could be going on underneath a detached protector mode, so say if it was defectiveness, shame, they don't get to heal the defectiveness, shame by avoiding connection with a partner. Yeah, that just is like a band-aid. Just like a band-aid. They don't get to see that actually they are worthy, even when close up with a person, because we all have flaws. They don't get to experience the fact that having flaws is okay. and that still doesn't make them unlovable. They don't get to heal that. So that's a really important reason to identify a detached protector mode, because these schemas are not healing when we're in the coping mode all the time. And unworthiness, loneliness, and disconnection will set the tone of the relationship when the detached protector mode is not treated. Okay, so now the fun part. Let's start to look at some of the schema pathways to the detached protector mode. Like, what schemas go on in someone's life that result in them having to develop a detached protector mode. If we think about disconnection, detachment, avoidance as being like a survival strategy, you know, what was going on in the early environment that this child had to disconnect, had to run away, had to escape. Yeah. So I've outlined 3 pathways today, and they're not, it's not meant to be prescriptive, like these are the only pathways to the detached protector mode. Probably all 18 schemas could result in detached protector mode. But I'm sharing with you the ones that I see frequently in my work, especially in the realm of intimate relationships. Yeah. So the first pathway that leads to a detached protector mode is to avoid emotions in general. You know, so by being detached, we get to avoid feeling. You know, we get to avoid being vulnerable, feeling the full range of our emotions. The sadness, the insecurity, the anxiety, the jealousy, you know, the sadness, the uncertainty, all of those feelings we get to avoid if we're in a detached protector mode. We don't have to confront or experience those feelings. Yeah. So we want to understand a little bit more about why someone might be so fearful of emotions, why they might be so hell-bent on avoiding emotions. We would want to explore that story. Okay. The second pathway that we're going to look at today towards a detached protector mode is that they may be avoiding shame and punishment. The shame and punishment that comes from closeness or intimacy. You know, if closeness or intimacy meant shame and punishment or abuse, then a detached protector mode is going to be pretty adaptive for that person to survive that environment. Yeah. The third pathway towards developing a detached protector mode that we're going to look at today is the associating commitment with suffocation or loss of freedom. So if this person with a detached protector mode grew up in a family environment where closeness or intimacy or connection actually meant suffocation, obligation, loss of freedom, you know, this sort of ownership, then that makes sense too, doesn't it? It makes sense that someone would develop this mechanism for escape and distance, because, well, who wants to be suffocated? Nobody does. You know, it's not healthy. The healthy adult needs autonomy and freedom to be self-expressed. So imagine feeling like you were continually responsible for someone else's well-being, and your own self-expression caused them to panic. Then closeness is going to feel pretty scary to that person. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's break it all down. Okay, so the first pathway was avoiding emotions and overwhelm. So this is for the person who may have a detached protector mode, because for some reason feeling emotions is scary to them. Feeling emotions just feels so overwhelming. It's confusing. They don't know what to do with emotions. Okay. So detaching from emotions, which is basically, you know, disconnecting from the neck down. I think Dan Siegel talks about that. You know, some people are like so disconnected from their body and their heart, and they're just entirely in their head. So that would be an example of this person. It just feels safer to be in the head because it feels unsafe to be in the body, and it feels unsafe to be connected to the emotions in your heart. Okay, so for example, how that would play out in a family would be the unmet needs for that person would be free emotional expression and validation. So they needed to be more free about expressing emotions, or they needed to have that modeled by the parents. You know, they needed to sort of see how emotions work, you know, by having parents who also were connected to their feelings and expressing their feelings, and kind of modeling and teaching the children in the family about emotional expression just through the way that they went about life. And it's also communicating a message to the child that emotions are okay, they are safe, and they're not shameful and bad, and they don't need to be suppressed or shoved down or swept under the carpet. So that's the unmet need, is for this more sort of freedom of emotional expression and validating of emotions and a welcoming of emotions. Yeah, so that's a core unmet need in childhood. The schema that would develop from that environment, the primary schema would be emotional inhibition. So this idea that emotions are bad, they should be shoved down, they should be suppressed, and all sorts of stories connected to why they're bad, like you know, only crazy people get emotional, or only irrational people get emotional, or women are crazy, or, you know, men who show emotions are weak, or whatever story sort of went on, you know, that led to the emotional inhibition. And then I've got emotional deprivation in brackets, because I would say that's like a consequence of chronic emotional suppression, is that you never get your inner world validated by other people. So emotional deprivation kind of has to go along with that, even though that may not be the main driving force for the detached protector mode. The main driving force might be just to disconnect from emotions, not because they don't feel like other people are going to get them, but because they feel like letting their emotions come up is bad. Okay, so can you see how that happens? You can sort of imagine a family environment like that. Yeah, so common. And this is, I mean, my other little hobby horse is, you know, smashing the patriarchy and, you know, the impact of patriarchal values on our mental health and well-being. And I feel like this is just, you know, so widespread, and it, you know, I think it's getting better. I think it's getting better. But if you looked at messages that children say got growing up in the 70s or the 50s, you know, we've got a whole generation of, we've got several generations of people that have grown up with this message that emotional expression is bad. And it's a very unhealthy masculine sort of, yeah, concept. Because feminine energy is more about being very connected to emotions and expressing emotions and allowing emotions to play a big role in our relationships, you know. So, you know, cutting off from emotions is cutting off from the, you know, the feminine itself. So anyway, that's just a whole nother topic, you know, don't even get me started on that. But you can see the sort of the messages that go on in families where there's this real push to, you know, suppress emotions. Okay, so someone in this situation is just not practiced at feeling their emotions. They've just, for decades, they've experienced disconnecting from their emotions. So they're quite scared of their emotions, and obviously intimate relationships are going to activate emotions. You know, you can't be that close to someone that you feel both love and desire for and not have strong emotional reactions, you know, go on. you know, you can't just sort of exist like, you know, like colleagues. It's just not happening. There's a lot of emotions that get activated. So you can imagine how uncomfortable it is for both people. You know, one person's trying to suppress the emotions, the other person saying, you're not expressing enough emotions and I don't feel like I can really connect with you. Yeah. All right. So the second pathway that you might like to consider in, if you've identified a detached protector mode in a client, is when they might be avoiding shame or punishment. Okay. So for many of our clients, closeness or intimacy or connection actually meant shaming and punishing. Okay, so therefore the unmet need is, you know, around unconditional worthiness and acceptance and just a valuing of the child. So really sort of seeing the child as, you know, just a dumping ground for the adult's issues. That can lead to a number of schemas developing: defectiveness, shame, punitiveness, and mistrust abuse. So for example, defectiveness shame would be, you know, when I get close to my mum or dad, all I hear is criticism. Yeah. All I hear is what is wrong with me, what I need to fix about myself. And so therefore that gives the message that you're not okay just as you are. You know, you're flawed, you're defective. Yeah. So the child would internalize that shame and go, oh, whenever I get close to someone, all I get is criticism. So they're going to be very sensitive to that happening again in an intimate relationship. You know, the closer I am with someone, the more they can see me, the more visible I am, you know, and any flaws that I might have that I think I'm doing a pretty good job of hiding, you know, from a distance, the closer I get to someone, the more exposed I feel, because the more they're going to hear me speak and my thoughts and my own sort of personality, and they're going to see that, and then they're going to criticize me too. So I'm going to feel shame. Yeah. So people are going to want to keep a distance from that shame. But punitiveness also, let's look at punitiveness. You know, the closer I am to someone, the more chance there is that I'm going to get scolded or in trouble, you know, for the problems that are going on in that person's life. Because I'm not getting scolded by, you know, my neighbor down the road. You know, they're not blaming me for their problems, but my partner's blaming me for all their problems. My mother, my father, you know, takes it all out on me. So can you see how closeness and intimacy then becomes, you know, a source of punishment? You know, like, oh, I'll be scapegoated. I'm not getting scapegoated by my neighbor down the road, but I will be blamed for, you know, my partner's bad day, or my mum's bad day, or my dad's bad day. Yeah. So punitiveness, like the idea that there's always someone to blame. There's this scolding, there's this fault finding that goes on in relationships, or has gone on in relationships, that becomes part of that person's schema about relationships. Or mistrust abuse. You know, the closer I get to someone, the more opportunity they have to betray me, hurt me, abuse me. Yeah. So I'm going to avoid being abused or mistreated, by keeping a safe distance. Okay, same outcome, detached protector mode. Yep, am making sense? Hope so. Okay, let's look at pathway 3, where the person may develop a detached protector mode because they're avoiding suffocation or feeling trapped. So if the unmet need in that family of origin is autonomy and individuality, you know, so there wasn't permission to kind of be your own separate self. You know, you felt like you were doing something wrong if you went off and, you know, and wanted to hang out with your mates on the weekends when you're a teenager. You feel like, you know, the family unit suffers when you start to exert your own independence. Yeah. So the unmet need is for autonomy and individuality. to have an identity outside of the family. Okay, so the schemas that can develop in this situation could be enmeshment or could be subjugation. Yeah, so the person may feel like intimacy and relationships means that you have to give up yourself, have to give up your sense of self, your own identity, and all of your focus and attention needs to go on this relationship and the needs of the other person. Really, you know, the needs of the other person need to take up my entire focus. Yeah. So same outcome again, detached protector, going to keep a safe distance so that I can't become engulfed, so that I'm not going to invest in this relationship fully, because then that just leaves me open to being suffocated again and trapped again, and I'll have to give up all of my autonomy if I step into this relationship. Is that useful, guys? Hope so. Hope so. Sometimes it's really good to just break it down and, you know, to kind of know what schema we're working with, because otherwise it could just be going around and round and round. Also, I feel like there are some sort of models or treatment approaches for, you know, couples therapy that might not go as in depth. Like they might look at the behavior that's going on that's unhealthy on the surface, but if we don't address what's driving that behavior, you know, because there's deep wounds and unconscious processes that are driving this behavior. So if you just gave your couples, you know, some new behaviors to take away and try out, like being more open with your emotions or turning towards your partner or something like that. But there's such strong, powerful forces that are going on underneath the surface that would just sabotage any kind of behavioral homework technique. So that's why I love schema therapy, because it kind of gets right down into the root and go, oh, well, if relationships for you meant punishment, or if relationships for you meant smothering and giving up your autonomy, then I can understand why you've got this detached protector mode. That makes total sense to me, because that was quite adaptive at the time. That was quite clever for you to work out how to survive. Yeah, it's just way more powerful. All right, let's have a little look at attachment styles, and in particular, let's have a look at avoidant dismissive attachment styles. So, I mean, yes, there's some overlap. I mean, the detached protector is a schema mode, which means that there were unmet needs in the environment. So there's definitely an environmental influence to this behavior. Whereas attachment styles might be seen as more temperament, more genetic, but there's a lot of overlap as well. So we're looking for whether there's a story that's connected to that sort of distancing behavior. Right, so clients with an avoidant attachment style will experience nervous system arousal when relationships feel too close. Okay, so there's a physiological reaction that they get. This is like a part of their brain says, run, yeah, run. And it's a total physiological response that is beyond, you know, logical reasoning. And why do they get this nervous system response when they get too close? Because, going back to our pathways, if intimacy and closeness stir up emotions, and stirring up emotions is bad for them for some reason, then the nervous system is going to say, warning, warning. Yeah. Intimacy and closeness inevitably reveals our flaws when we're up close. You can't be up close with someone for extended periods of time without seeing all of their shit, you know, all of their junk, all of their not so great aspects. Do you all agree? Yes, hopefully, yes. It's inevitable, because we've all got these, you know, not great things about us, these quirky behaviors or these, you know, little insecurities. And when you're up close with someone for long periods of time, it's just going to come out. Yeah, we can't sort of hide it. So, you know, someone with an avoidant attachment style who might also have some schemas around defectiveness and shame, their attachment system is going to say, okay, to get to safety, you need to run away. Yeah, you need to go hide somewhere where you can't be seen. That's the only way that you can stay safe. Staying here is not safe because then it's going to reveal all your flaws and they're going to see them. And that's just going to definitely lead to shame. Yeah. Or thirdly, intimacy and closeness involves accountability and exposure to our human imperfections and mistakes. You know, the closer we are to someone, we are going to stuff up from time to time. You know, we're going to make a mistake, and you know, the other person is going to want to hold us accountable for that. You know, and we're going to have to show up, and we're going to have to admit our mistakes. We're going to have to be accountable, and if that meant more punishment, then that's going to feel very threatening to someone with an avoidant attachment style, unless they can bring more consciousness into the mix, which is what we're all about with the healthy adult. Okay. So let's look at how they might present in therapy. For individual therapy, they might come in where they fear losing their relationship, because maybe they say, oh, my partner's been complaining of disconnection and loneliness. Or they might be earlier in the dating stages, and you know, they're meeting these partners who are quite anxious, and they're like, what's going on? Why are they so demanding and needy? But maybe they're ready to address the patterns. They're ready to have a look at, well, how am I contributing to this pattern here? Why am I getting all these partners who say that I'm distant or cold or disconnected or detached or too rational? What's going on here? Yeah, so that might be one way that they present in therapy. Or they might be single and ready to re-enter a relationship after a long period of avoidance and protecting themselves, but they're starting to get lonely and they're suffering, and they're starting to have this sort of inner urge that, no, actually, wouldn't it be nice to have a relationship? But they're also quite freaked out by that, because they, you know, I think to some degree they're aware that they've got this detached protector mode, and aware that this detached protector mode contributed to relationships failing in the past, and they're ready to address it, and they want to be supported by a therapist as they go through this very scary process of forming a new bond with someone. Super scary, especially for someone with a strong detached protector mode. Not as much for someone with an anxious attachment mode. I'm like, yay, yeah, let's go. All right, so couples therapy, how they might present for couples therapy. One partner is complaining of distance, dismissal of emotions, over rationalizing, that their partner's too logical or pragmatic, and there's not enough compassion. There's not enough heart connection in the relationship, and the other partner's feeling that distance and that disconnection. And often the other partner is kind of maybe the one driving for the couples therapy, because maybe the person with the detached protector mode, you know, that's the least of their priorities, is to go and talk about feelings. You know, they would prefer to not go there. So sometimes they're being dragged along to therapy. Okay, what else might be going on? There may be sort of this mild dismissal of their partner's emotions. And you would think that this is not so serious. They're like, oh, that's not a big deal, you know, fairly happy couple. But if that went on for years or decades, this mild dismissal of your partner's emotions, then, you know, from the Gottman's work, we know that creates that distance, because any bids for connection, they're coming from this sort of emotional place, you know, just to feel loved, together, close, all of that. That's a very emotional experience, and we can create that by turning towards a partner and having them kind of step in and hold us in that moment, or support us, or validate our feelings, and that creates that safety and that bond. But imagine, you know, turning towards your partner, you know, oh, why didn't you call me back today? Right? Here's a beautiful moment where a partner could create that connection by saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I did say that I was going to call you and it got away with me. Let me make that up to you tomorrow, for example. Yeah. That would be a nice responding to that bid for connection. But a mild dismissal of the partner's emotions would sound more like, yeah, well, I had that really big project on today, remember? So it's not out of, you know, it's not terrible, their response. It's mild, and it can, if it went undetected over a long period of time, it does damage intimate relationships, because then the person's going to not make as many bids for that connection, because they're going to feel like they're dismissed, or their needs for closeness or intimacy are dismissed. And intimacy and connection is created in those tiny little moments like that. You know, and that builds up to, you know, say intimacy in the bedroom is because of all these other sort of, you know, moments of connection and intimacy, just in those sort of passing moments like that. Overly rational or pragmatic responses to emotion-based bids for connection. So the person might be always in the head, not in their heart. So similar to what I just said. Alcohol or substance abuse, gambling, pornography use that impacts on the trust and the bond in the relationship. So any addictive behavior is like a relationship. It's like an intimate relationship. It's like, oh, come to me, Scotch, you're my friend. Yeah. And it's, yeah, a lot of energy and attention goes into, you know, activities centering around this addiction. That's going to take attention away from the couple, from the partner. If they don't get to connect every day to talk about, you know, how was your day today? What went on for you? This is what I'm up to at work at the moment. You know, that sort of connecting that goes on frequently in relationships, that could be completely sabotaged by substance addiction. So there's just not an opportunity to build a connection. Yeah. So that could be a reason why someone presents in therapy, is because their detachment is starting to impact on the relationship. Or just physical distancing, you know, staying away from the home, avoiding physical proximity, very little time together. Threat of the third. So I'm pretty sure that this term was coined by Stan Tatkin, where he says that all relationships have a third entity that can impact or threaten the bond of the relationship, whether that's flirting with other people, an ex-partner, a demanding job, a substance, kids from a previous marriage, and, you know, etc. You know, that's all like a third kind of energy that could sabotage the relationship. So it's really important to be aware of how the couple manage that, or preoccupied with work, career demands, or social life. So just going to pause here, and has anyone got any questions, or anyone want to come off and chat and ask the question? Please let me know. You can just you know, raise your hand, or you can type into the chat. Can the threat of the third also be in-laws? Yes, definitely. Why did I not say that? Oh, yes, in-laws, obvious. So obvious. And, you know, Stan Chapman's approach would be that, you know, the relationship is sacred between these two adults. They have to like make an agreement with one another that, you know, you know, even your own kids can't sabotage the relationship. You can't allow your own biological children to come in and introduce a behavior into that's going to sabotage that relationship. So definitely in-laws, you know, if someone has still got that enmeshment with their family of origin and their mother says, we need you to come to our house this weekend, but you had something arranged with your partner, you know, that's definitely a potential threat. If that person said, oh, okay, well, you know, my mum said that I need to go around to their house, and then the partners are like, but what about us? So absolutely, that can be a big threat. Needs to be managed, and needs to, the relationship needs to be primary, and agreements made around honoring the fact that, you know, this is the number one relationship. Relationships with other people are second to that. All right. So feel free to, you know, ask any questions or anything, but I'll just continue on now. So now we're going to get a little bit more into the techniques, how we would work with this in schema therapy. So we can use imagery to explore the origins of the detached protector mode. If you're wondering, where did this side come from? Okay. So one example is that you could take a situation or a trigger or an event from their current life where the detached protector mode is present. So when I did this with a couple, I like to do imagery just with an individual. I don't think I've ever done imagery with the partner there, but maybe people do that. But usually when I'm doing this deep work, really vulnerable work, I'm just working with one person in the room. I'd say, okay, James, think about that situation this week where there was a little bit of tension with your wife and you just wanted to dismiss, you know, what she said and shut down, you know, how she was feeling, or just get away from her. And close your eyes and get an image of that. Can you see yourself in that situation? Good. Pay attention. What are you feeling? What thoughts are going on in your mind? You know, and just notice this urge to get away from the tension and this discomfort that you're feeling. Okay, now I want you to put that image to the side and I want you to float back to your childhood and see if you can bring up an image where you had a similar feeling, where you wanted to escape from the tension that was going on around you. Okay, what do you see? Yeah, so what you may find is that the person with the detached protector mode identifies that in their childhood, that by detaching, it helped them to escape from intense emotions. Like, you know, the intensity of the emotions was just too much. There wasn't enough regulation going on the part of the parent. The parent was really emotionally dysregulated. So therefore, it just felt unsafe to be around intense emotions, because now we've got the child's emotions and parents' emotions, like chaos. So that could be A, you know, the detached protector helped them to escape from just the scariness of intense emotions. B, there could be a situation where they're just always being criticized, always getting punished, always targeted. They might be abused, they might be scolded or scapegoated, or fault finding goes on anytime they're around a parent. Or C, suffocation from this sort of enmeshment suffering, that smothering. Feeling like, you know, the closer I am to someone, they're just going to like swallow me up, and they're just going to start talking about all their issues and start, you know, dumping all of their emotional stuff onto me. And then I feel responsible for their well-being. And I feel like if I stepped away from that, that they would suffer, and that I'm just, you know, I've got no choice. I feel like I'm trapped. Yeah. So maybe they might have had a parent who had an untreated mental illness or something like that, or trauma. All right. Right. So the point of this imagery is that you, as the therapist, whilst they're in the image, you know, and connecting to that side of them that wants to run away, that you as the therapist might be saying, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Of course you would want to run away from intense emotions, yeah, when other people aren't regulating their emotions. Of course you would want to distance yourself from being targeted and criticized all the time. You know, that would feel terrible. That would feel awful. Of course you would want to get away from that. If someone's continually criticizing you and putting you down and judging you, yeah. Or of course you want to get away when closeness feels like, you know, you're obligated to look after someone. You know, that makes sense that you want to keep your distance from someone that is going to sort of use you as a crutch, yeah, because that's not a very healthy relationship. You know, that person needs to be addressing their own issues and not leaning on you like that. Yeah. So you can see how just that can be quite healing. Yeah, because they're starting to get a sense of the unmet need, and also that they, you know, have this core need. It's normal to need acceptance or unconditional acceptance. It's normal to need space and autonomy. You know, there's nothing bad about them for wanting those things from their relationships. It's normal to want forgiveness and compassion and to not be blamed, you know, for everything that goes wrong in the other person's life. Okay. Good. All right. So continuing with imagery to explore the origins of the detached protector mode. In this imagery, you can connect with the child and tell them that it was unhealthy for the parent or the caregiver to give them an unhealthy message about emotional expression, an unhealthy message about blame, punishment, scapegoating, and the concept that someone is always responsible for another person's stress. So that's an unhealthy message that the person with the detached protector mode would have internalized. You know, this idea that if someone else is stressed, then it must be someone's fault, someone else's fault. Does that make sense? So that's often a message that they've internalized in that family. And the idea that, you know, people are entitled to kind of get that out or to dump that on that person, to project that. If they're feeling stressed, then they're entitled to dish out punishment for their stress. I think Brene Brown's got a really lovely video clip about blaming. I'll put it on my Facebook page. Yeah, anyway, some of you have probably seen it. Or if they got an unhealthy message about the idea that intimacy is imposed on them, that they've got no choice, that intimacy and closeness can be demanded from them, that manipulation and inducing guilt is an acceptable tool to use whenever one person exercises autonomy. Okay, so that's an unhealthy message that they might have grown up with, that you know, other people are entitled to kind of swallow you up and smother you and demand closeness from you. All right, so after collecting information about the client's parents or caregivers, you could have an imagery with where the parents are confronted about these unhealthy messages that the child has internalized, about emotional expression, about fault finding, or about others demanding closeness. I won't go too much into that today because many of you are familiar with how that would look. A confrontation with the parent where you as the therapist come in and you say, can I talk to your dad now? Or can I talk to your mum now? And the point of that is not to just do more blaming. The point of that is to undo the internalized message, and to sort of take a stand for the core needs. Say, please don't give your child the idea that they're always responsible for your mood. Yeah. Or please learn to regulate your emotions better so that you can model healthy emotional expression for your child, because they're going to need this skill later on in their adult intimate relationships. They're going to need to know how to regulate their own emotions and how to tolerate emotional expression in a partner. So can you see that you're just taking a stand for the unmet need? It's not so that you can, be all judgy. It's so that you can speak on behalf of the unmet need of the child. Alrighty. Okay, so now just let's have a look at some chair dialogues that we might use in bypassing the detached protector. Okay, so step 1, identify it and name it. So we'll have it, I'll talk you through that. Step 2 is to interview it. So many of you are familiar with interviewing a coping mode, where we get to educate the client, that the detached protector mode was adaptive back then. So we would do this in a separate chair. Say, where did you come from? Where did you start? When did you first appear in James's life? We would say, well, it was adaptive back then, but it's not sustainable now in your intimate relationships, because a certain amount of closeness is required to keep a relationship alive, which means developing tolerance for each other's emotions, accepting one's own and the partner's imperfections, and the natural accountability and the investment that's required for healthy intimate relationship. So we're sort of challenging the detached protector mode in this interview. And then thirdly, we want to bypass it. We want to get around it. We want to connect directly to that vulnerable child who's suffering, with those feelings of shame, those feelings of being smothered or guilt, or overwhelm. All right. So when we're identifying the detached protector mode, obviously the therapist empathy is key, because usually what's going on in the relationship is there's not a lot of empathy going on between the couple. So it's very hard for, say, the person with a more anxious attachment style to have a lot of empathy for the person who's a bit more detached and avoidant. They're like, well, they should just be more close to me. It's very hard for the person with the detached protector mode or avoidant attachment to have a lot of empathy for the person with the anxious attachment, because they're like, well, they should just be less anxious and less needy and just, give me more space. So you can see how, there's this really low sense of empathy being felt by both people. So when we first identify there's a detached protector mode, we want to have a lot of empathy for the fact that this is a side of the personality that was adaptive at a certain point in their lives. And we want to celebrate the fact that it stepped in at that time to help them. But we also want to take a look at it. So we could say things like, well, it sounds like there's a side of you, James, that sort of steps in to create space in your relationship. It seems like your partner experiences some kind of distancing or dismissal of emotions, or some kind of wall when it comes to sharing emotions, or when it comes to turning towards you for empathy or understanding, or initiating affection or sex. Is this something that's come up for you before in your intimate relationships? So you're just starting to talk about it like a pattern, like a mode, like let's just chat about this aspect of you. And, part of step 1 is, what should we call this part of you? You've got to give it a name, because by giving it a name, we differentiate it, we kind of put it out here, and then we can actually be in dialogue with it. What should we call this part of you? I like saying that because I like to give them permission to come up with a name. And some people, when they start therapy, they named this part of them before they even knew about schema therapy. Some people are like, oh yeah, that's Harry. They just come up with a random name, or oh, that's the wall. So some people are quite intuitive, and they are aware that there's a side of them that distances. Okay, so that would just look like, having a third chair, a separate chair, where you get them to come over. Let's just talk with this side of you. You know, let's separate it out from you. Okay. Another lovely technique, which I learned from Eckhart Rodiger, who's a lovely German schema therapist. So he ran some training in 2017 at the Barcelona Schema Therapy Summer School, which I was so lucky to go to. And he has well, this is an adaptation of his technique, is that often he will ask the client to firstly to sit in the coping mode chair and talk from that side and identify with that mode, but then he'll ask the client to stand up, and the two of them will stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and kind of look in on this coping mode. And it's a little bit of an ACT kind of principle or technique where you're sort of observing this aspect of the personality. So I've used this with couples where I've said, you know, like if there's tension and there's this real disconnection and there's obvious detachment going on in one person, and I can see that they're so disconnected from their emotions because they're feeling very overwhelmed. So say, can we all stand up? Can we all stand up? And then I will turn the chairs, the couples chairs, facing each other, and then all three of us, me in the middle, and they'll be sort of side by side next to me, and they were all looking in at this couple. And it's just such a beautiful perspective, because then you can kind of, you know, like when you're at a party and you're sort of standing next to someone and you're observing, and you're like, what do you think is going on for him over there? What do you think is going on for her when that happens? And I wonder what she needs more of, and I wonder what he needs from her. Can you see how this is a really lovely perspective to take, because you step out of the coping mode? Yeah, so this has been so powerful to use, you know, either with couples or with individuals. The idea is that you're stepping back from a coping mode and you can chat about it. You can chat more objectively about, well, how did it serve him earlier on in his life? How do you think it's not serving him so well now? Yeah. So that's from, yeah, so Eckhart, you know, some of you might be aware of the book Contextual Schema Therapy, which only came out like 2 years ago. There's a lot more detail in there, if you like. All right, so interviewing this mode, what do we want to ask it? Okay, so when it's sitting over in its separate chair, we can start to interview it by asking questions like, so when did you first learn to disconnect or create distance from emotions? You know, why was that important to you? How did that help you? How might it have been more safe or adaptive for you as a child to cut off from your emotions and stay in your head and avoid expressing how you feel or distance yourself from others? What would have been the risks of showing how you feel, or not running away or not escaping? What would have been the risks to you? What would have happened if you'd stayed closer? And I wonder what you might have concluded about relationships or closeness or intimacy at that stage of your life. And, you know, what kind of conclusions or assumptions really helped to inform this more detached side, the side of you that concluded that it was better to stay a safe distance. Okay, and what would you need to believe now about yourself, about emotional expression, about your human imperfection, about autonomy and independence, so that you wouldn't need to create, you know, this big wall with your partner? What would you need to believe? So this is so important, and this is starting to get into the healthy adult. What are the new beliefs of the healthy adult that would support, say, more closeness, more connection, more tolerance for emotions? What do they need to believe about emotions? What do they need to believe about flaws? What do they need to believe about autonomy that would support them being a little bit more open and transparent with a partner? Yeah. Okay. Then in this chair dialogue, we can just explore how the coping mode, the detached protector mode, protects the vulnerable child. You know, so the vulnerable child at the back feels the shame, is afraid, feels smothered, guilty. The coping mode actually comes in as a solution. So the therapist can help the client to sort of see that there's unmet needs at the back, the vulnerable child, that we need to address more directly. That this detached protector mode isn't a long-term solution. It's not going to get the needs met of the vulnerable child. It's just like a band-aid. And then we bypass it. Say it like it's so easy. You could take a year to get to this stage with some people. We bypass it. So the healthy adult and the vulnerable child need to become a team. They need to be close. That, you know, if we're talking about true intimacy, we're really talking about the bond between the healthy adult and the vulnerable child. Their relationship is key. They need to become a team where the healthy adult mode agrees to fight against shame and blame. You know, like, no, I'm not doing this shaming and blaming and criticizing in my relationships anymore. I'm not inviting that. You know, I'm not going to internally criticize and beat myself up. I'm not also going to allow a partner to beat me up, you know, like that. The healthy adult agrees to learn strategies to stretch their tolerance for emotional expression and emotion regulation, and overtly request space. Like, if someone needs a certain amount of space, needs a certain amount of autonomy for their relationship to be functional, that's fine. That's fine. That's a need. That's a core need. And some people are going to need more space than others. So we might just support our clients with a detached protector mode to take ownership of that, to own their need for space, and to just have conversations with a partner. Because if they've got a partner with an anxious attachment style, but they don't overtly say, I need space, I need to go into my cave, I need to sort of time out. If they don't say it, then the other person's just going to be guessing and worrying and anxious every time they take space. So there's just so much to be said in just a little bit of healthy adult communication around their need for autonomy. But it also could be encouraging our clients to open up to their partner about why they have this detached protector mode. Like, you know, hopefully there's a trusting bond there that they can talk to their partner and say, well, I was never allowed space as a child. Or whenever I would get close to a parent, I feel like I was criticized, or that they would just dump on me, yeah, or blame me for something. So I learned to just keep a safe distance. That conversation in itself is just so important to create a healthy relationship, because then that sort of opens up to more compassion and empathy. The healthy adult and secure attachment style needs to actively engage in a dialogue with the partner about their discomfort with emotions. I think I just said this, closeness and demands, and start to communicate their own needs and listen to their partner's needs as well. So, you know, avoiding it, like sweeping it under the carpet, is the technique of the detached protector mode. It's just not going to cut it. It's just not going to cut it, because that leaves the other person in the dark, and that's going to create a lot of feelings of loneliness and not feeling important or valued or loved. Okay, so we need to have these distance-based conversations. You know, they need to be on the table. Okay, so that would just sort of look like, you know, just bringing the healthy adult and the vulnerable child close together. So this dialogue here could be, say if the vulnerable child had defectiveness shame, then we get the client to go sit in the healthy adult chair next to the vulnerable child, and we might facilitate a dialogue between these two. We say, James, could you turn towards this side of you that feels unlovable and unworthy, and tell him how he's always been lovable, he's always been worthy, you know, that he's sorry that he got all these messages that he wasn't good enough, that he wasn't enough, there's something wrong with him, that there's something that he had to fix about him. And you facilitate that dialogue. So what I like about this is just the physical proximity, and it allows the person sitting in the healthy adult chair to maybe even reach out and put their hand on the other chair. And there could be a photograph of themselves as a child in that other chair. So they're really reaching out and creating that bond with their vulnerable side, so that they don't have to do this detached protector thing all the time. Do you know what I mean? Because the healthy adult steps in to meet the unmet needs and says, you are worthy, and not everything that goes wrong is somebody's fault. So you don't have to put up with being scapegoated all the time. And you're allowed to have autonomy, and you're allowed to have your own interests, and you don't need to feel like all of your attention needs to go on looking after the needs of someone else. So that allows for that dialogue to happen when it's real close like that. Alrighty, so what would it look like moving from avoidant attachment or detached protector to healthy adult or security? These, I've just come up with a couple of statements, a couple of beliefs, but you can play around with them, and you can play around with them with your clients, finding the language and the wording that would be right for them. One could be, I acknowledge that all healthy relationships involve both closeness and distance. What a relief. What a relief to acknowledge that. Yeah? Because sometimes it feels like it's one or the other. It has to be, one person has to win out and the other person has to lose. No, we can have both. I accept that my nervous system is more wired towards distance, privacy, and space. Again, what a relief. Like, what a revelation to accept your own nervous system, to celebrate it, and to just recognize that that's just how you're wired, and there's not something terribly wrong with you, and you're not a bad person, and you're not cold. I acknowledge that my need for distance or focusing on the rational over emotional positions will cause my partner to feel anxious or lonely. And I am open to their experience and providing emotional safety where possible. So this one's a big one, because to arrive at that, the client would need to learn more tolerance for emotions, a range of emotions that they might not have ever developed tolerance for. But the way I sometimes try and demonstrate it physically is the person with the more detached or the more rational kind of turning someone away. It's kind of like they've got this kind of stance. They're like, no, we're not gonna do this heart to heart thing. I'm gonna block you from any kind of emotional stuff. But I say to the person with the detached protector mode, what would it take for you to be a little bit more like this? Like, this is sort of like holding space. I can hold space for you while the other person does this emotional expressing, which is it's just emotions. It's just, and especially for a woman, they're going to probably do a lot of that, a lot of expressing of how they're feeling moment by moment. So I might say to a partner who's got a more detached protector mode, what would it take for you to feel a bit more solid like this, like I can hold space? What would you need to believe for you to kind of take this stance while your partner is kind of doing all the emotional expressing? Sometimes I have people say, well, she's never listened to my emotions, so why should I hold space? I'm like, okay, well, you'll get a turn later, but I say the person who's turning towards and coming with the initiating the emotional expression needs to be the person whose emotions are the focus. The other person needs to be the solid rock in that moment, and then is not the time to bring up their unmet needs or their pain. So some training needs to go into that. Yeah. But the point is, what do you need to work on so that you can get to a point where you can say, take on this belief that, I acknowledge that if I keep distancing or dismissing my partner's emotions, that will cause my partner to feel anxious or lonely. And I'm open to taking on more of their view? What would need to shift for you to take that position? Because that's what we're trying to coach someone with a detached protector mode to adopt that position, that I can actually take on and hold space for my partner's emotions without it meaning that I'm in trouble, without it meaning that I'm bad or should be ashamed of myself, and without it meaning that they're going to swallow me up and now demand, something of me. If I hold space for their emotions and let them express how they're feeling, sometimes they think then the next step along from that is that now they're going to demand that I fix those feelings. Yeah. So you can see how the schemas contribute to the detached protector mode, because they feel like if I hold space, then I lose my identity, or then I become shamed, or whatever the belief is. All right. So I really hope that these ideas are going to give you some guidance and ideas for how to actually address this mode in therapy. Like, what are some of the techniques, strategies, chair dialogue, imagery, even the Socratic questioning that you could use to better bypass the detached protector mode. So thank you so much for being here today and your interest in this topic. I hope it was really useful. I'll send you out the slides as well. And yeah, so thanks so much for joining, and I will see some of you at the next and the final webinar, which is on integrating the happy child. So that's really about, that third layer, that polarity, bringing more joy and delight and energy and positive emotion back into the relationship. So, by working on all of these other modes that we've been doing in the other webinars, hopefully we've paved out more of a pathway for more joy. Okay, so thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely day and take care. You're welcome.